So we are chatting about real estate. We are chatting about finances.
Okay, so this video is the $500,000 tax-free benefit of owning your first home, and when to make the sacrifice to make that happen in life. Disclaimers: not financial advice. We're just it's just entertainment. We're not CPAs. We're not lawyers. We've just dabbled in these waters for a little bit, and I've been awake for a couple days now, and I'm in LA traffic on the way to Disneyland. So
We're sharing our story as the kids have fallen asleep, and we're chatting in the car and thought this is something we have a little bit of insight into, and we're going to share with you.
yeah, so this is targeted for people who, because not everyone enjoys spending every waking moment thinking about the stresses of money like I do. Some people just want that part of their life to flow, which totally makes sense. And this might be more aimed at you guys, most specifically if you're in that first home phase, whether it's just before or during the process or 5 years after. When is the right time to sacrifice? Because buying a home takes sacrifice. When is the right time, love?
So, anytime. I don't think, just like with many things in life, that there's a timing piece of it. You just trust the timing of your life. So when we bought our first piece of property, it came kind of unexpectedly. I wasn't working, and I had taken a step away from teaching at the time, and we decided we wanted to buy this piece of land, and we were going to do an owner builder project. So I cashed out my 403B. My teaching job that I had before was generous with matching a certain percent. And so I put into that, and we had about $25,000 we put towards buying our first piece of property. And we went all in trying to talk with the county to do an owner builder project, which didn't end up going the way we thought. I also got pregnant while unemployed, and we totally pivoted and ended up buying our first actual home in Citrus Heights in Sacramento area. And just all of that was not planned. Like, if we had planned, we probably would have bought the owner builder property earlier into my not teaching, and then I would have had more time and energy and capability to pour into that project, and maybe it would have turned out differently. Because by the time we did that, we were already trying to get pregnant, and then I did get pregnant, and so things changed. So I don't think that there's a right time.
And when we did the live and flip in Citrus Heights, you did that pregnant. You did that with a newborn, and then you did that pregnant again, and then you did that with 2 babies.
Yeah.
Right? The tail end of it.
Right. So all of that I would not suggest as timing, and I would suggest doing it before kids if possible. But I mean, it's still doable. Like, people do renovations on their home all the time with 5 kids. But it's the concept that we're trying to start off with is, like, you can't time things and line things up perfectly, and there's not this like magic thing. Just when you're in it, you can do things to set yourself up for the most success, but it's gonna be messy.
So something that my old mentor used to always say, Johnny, we used to raise kids in caves.
Yeah.
Like, it's gonna be okay.
Right.
And so it's like, choose your hard. And not all hard is the same level of hard. Like, some hards are harder.
Right.
But if you're like, hey, this is something we want to do, and oof, this is gonna hurt, but it'll bring us closer in a lot of ways, because hard times bring people closer. Are you willing to shoulder that in your relationship? Be like, hey, are you willing to take on a little hard with me right now? Or, actually what we need to do is just chill for a couple years.
Well, I think that was it. Like, we had chilled. We enjoyed our rental.
We did 2 years of therapy, and we got a rental that was actually a couple $100s a month too expensive for us, so we were splurging.
Yeah.
We did 2 years of build-up.
Right.
I had hip surgery, so I was healed up and ready to go.
We were doing other things that were a priority, and it gave us time to do the research and, like, be prepared to pull the trigger. And that's the thing with timing is, I don't think you can time things, but I think you can be ready. And even when you're not ready, still jump. But that was it. Like, we weren't prepared to do any of that stuff, but we were prepared at the same time. So I think just knowing that, like, um, be ready, and all the hours that we put in behind the scenes to get to that point, right? Like, we had decided to invest in my 403B at the max amount. So we had that money there. It was an option.
Didn't
We,
plan on using it, but
right.
it was there when we decided to make that change.
You had already done a bunch of research in real estate and were already reading, and you were already behind the scenes looking into that stuff and learning and growing. We were already touring houses for years since we had moved to Sacramento in 2015, and we were had our pulse on the market and the areas we wanted to buy and where we were comfortable to live. We had done these things behind the scenes, right, for years, so that when it was time, we could pull the trigger and jump.
And that being said, would it have worked without all that legwork? Probably. As long as you have a decent real estate agent, and you're surrounded by decent human beings, and you got a decent lender, and you look at things and you don't overextend yourself.
It just would have looked different.
Yeah, it just would have looked different. One of my favorite things about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger is that part of their business model is to buy good businesses for a fair price, not a fair business for a good price. And the same thing applies for homes, right? It's a good home. It's going to last 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 million years. It's an asset. Um, it's a good price. Like, if you can afford it monthly, it pushes the limit just a little bit, and you're in a job where you're gonna, right, your income's going to rise with the markets. Then take the step. But as far as, so you're looking at buying your home, you haven't done it, or you've lived in your home for a couple of years, what power is now inside that home that you might not even know is there? Power of option. As the government supports you buying homes. That's a beautiful thing. We have great lending in this country that supports our economy's growth, and it's heavily weighted in real estate. Again, not CPA. But what was the benefit of us living in Citrus Heights?
Well, there is so many. One initially was we were renting for $2,200 a month, and then our mortgage was $1,700 a month. So just right out the gate, we were saving about $500, and now we owned an asset.
And we only put 3% down, right?
I can't remember if it was 3 or 5, but I want to say 3.
On a $260,000 home.
Yeah, so about 12,000.
Was it 12? Okay.
After closing costs and whatnot.
$12,000, right? And I know there's a lot of people listening to this nowadays who are like, that doesn't exist. I get that. I was also making a lot less money at the time.
Yeah.
But you get the concept. It's a very, you just got to get that small little chunk, and it gets you in the door. And then, let's say it wasn't even a value add. Which a value add is when you buy something that has something maybe wrong with it, and if you change that thing, then the overall value of the product is immediately higher than when you bought it. Our home in Citrus Heights was, it smelled like cat urine. It hadn't been touched since the 50s. It was under some rough. It needed a facelift, and it needed some enzyme paint.
We were the third owners. There was a little bit of work that had been done. They had put in laminate flooring, which we tore up. But we did extensive changes to make it our own, which we've talked about in a different podcast. And, I'm sure we'll talk about multiple times, so this home holds a special spot in our heart. But we definitely added value by updating the home and making it very enjoyable space to live in, because we plan to be there for 10 years and live really modestly on Jon's income and have bigger plans with different business ventures. But there was huge benefit of owning that specific home and the value we got out of it.
So Amanda just touched on a huge topic, which is we live modestly on our income. Um, again, we had, during that phase, we had no baby, all the way to 2 babies. And in our brief experience with having little humans, they just get more expensive as time goes on. So if you're listening and you already have older babies, there's one of ours. It's that whole, like, we live very frugally within our income is very personal, like what that means to you. So you just have to kind of figure out where your life balance is with that, where you're at, and make the Legos kind of fit whatever way they can, so that your system still moves forward in a healthy way. But as far as the incentives and what the good is with just buying into the whole world of, yep, we bought our home, let's move forward and hopefully good things come of it, is everyone could say, oh, you're saying the market always goes up. I'm not saying that. But as a whole, if you buy a home and you're in it for 2 years, I'm not a CPA, but more or less, if you've lived in it for 2 years, you've actually been the resident in it for 2 years. If you were to sell it, if it had gone up over $500,000 worth, up to $500,000 of new profit or new value in that home, you can receive tax-free, which is huge. That's absolutely huge. Everywhere you go, when you receive or exchange money, you're paying a percentage to the government. It's just their little lob off the top. And if you're taking capital gains, which is an investment that gains value that you sell, it's like 30%, upwards of 30% taxes. That's
Which we
huge.
did end up paying on our second property, which we'll talk about another time.
Property, we made a huge life change, shoot from the hip, and we paid 30% on a lot of, on crypto, on stocks, on real estate.
But we'll talk about that different. Get more detail.
But for this, so think about it. So you're like, okay, well, everyone says to buy a home, we're going to dive in. So you find the 26K, you go through the chaos of moving, you have the sheets on the windows, the babies are there, they're crying, the air conditioner doesn't work, it smells like cat pee, mama's not sleeping, daddy's drinking a lot of booze, overtime's too plentiful, overtime's not plentiful enough, all these things, like, start stacking up, you're in the storm. But then something changes, right? You're like, okay, we're here, we've been here for 3 years, what are we doing? Do we need to move? Do we need to stay? Is this our forever home? Are we going to do a reno? Are we going to do a cash out? Are we putting in a pool? I just hate this bathroom. We just need one more room. My mom always visits. Like, fill in the blank, right? Everyone has their own story. If you didn't buy that home, then odds are, out of just living, you probably didn't get an additional $250 to, who knows, or $125,000 to $375,000 more of equity to your name over the past few years. By owning that home in California, it probably went up by that much, which is crazy to think about, but it probably did. And you could take that money without giving any to the government, because that's under $500,000, and you can, instead of paying $25,000 for a home, now you can take that whole lump as a 20% down, or even keep a little bit for yourself for moving costs, whatever you need, right? This is your story. But you use that lump and then go buy real estate again. Now, if you use it, you don't own that home anymore, obviously, if you're selling. This is just one option. But let's say you just dove in. It was your starter home. Everyone said to get in. We're in. Life still sucks. Or life's beautiful, wherever you're at in your wave. But there has to be a change, right? Who says that you can't have one? A lot of people don't even realize the power of that. Initially, you needed $25,000 down. Well, now you're sitting on $200,000. $200,000. It took you 3 years to get that $25,000 of hard work and overtime and saving up, and things went wrong. Now it was just 3 years of living, and it's in your account. waiting for you to use. It's huge. It's very powerful. And you can take that $200,000, buy the 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house that you're like, this is what I wanted in the first place. We had to buy this little home that wasn't really what we were expecting, maybe. Well, there, now you have it. And you actually didn't even have to necessarily work any more to get it.
I think that's the big thing that we're reflecting on and looking back ourselves and conversations with other people is that initially to come up with that first $12,000 for the down, initially to come up with the money to flip, right, and make the updates, it was very challenging to find that money for us. But we lived in that home for exactly 2 years and 1 month before we sold it. Like close of escrow, handing the keys to someone else was 2 years and 1 month. And
that wasn't by design, by the way.
If we hadn't have done that, like we wouldn't have been able to buy the second home or third home that we then did. And none of that was planned. Going back to John's original question of like when, none of that was planned. But we couldn't have done that without the power of growing the equity in that first purchase. So I just think that's super important to think about when you're like, man, this is like the interest rates are crazy right now. The prices are crazy. Inflation is crazy. Everything is crazy. I just want to stay in my place that I'm renting that's maybe less expensive, which wasn't the case for us at the time, but maybe your place right now is less expensive than what your mortgage would be. Well, if you do the math over 2 years of what that difference is versus the power of the equity that will have grown, it's going to seem way bigger of an impact, and you have to think about it that way.
If you're choosing, I'm going to put myself out there, not everyone might like this. If you're choosing to rent right now, it's probably because of one or two things. Because you legitimately and don't have money for down payment on a house. It's just not there. Okay, that's okay. Obviously, that's okay. That's a reality for a lot of people. Or there's other reasons why people don't want to own or can't own. Being a resident in the United States, an actual resident, maybe you're an immigrant, etc. There's all these layers. But the bottom line is, if you have the money to buy a home, and you have the knowledge and ability to, and you're choosing not to, because you think the market's going to crash, that's a higher percentage. I think a lot of people
are waiting for that.
Yeah, whether they say it or not, in the back of their head, it's all this fear risk that we all play constantly, every single day. Even when we choose whether we're going to eat the Butterfinger or the broccoli, it's like, okay, well, do I want diabetes? Do I want diabetes? But also, broccoli's not as good as a Butterfinger. I'm going to be fat.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, I like to always keep my finger on the pulse of things and do my best and give every topic the attention it deserves. And our money and the way we use our money definitely deserves attention. But I'm also humble enough to sit here and go, if the best investors of our time say that they can't time the market and they're still buying, and then I'm going to have a little bit of humility enough to be like, I'm probably don't know as much as them. And you have to look at the overall track record and say, am I really holding out because of fear? Or am I holding out because of knowledge? Well, do I have more knowledge than these other people that are buying? No. So there was a time when one of my first mentors, Matt, stopped mid-drive and looked at me and said, Johnny, you need to buy a Bitcoin now. And I did not want to. I did not understand it, and I had worked really hard to buy it. It was either our first or second investment home out of state. It was, again, just getting every penny together by exchanging time for money. Just working overtime.
So you had the money set aside we were looking actively for purchasing a second home out of state. And instead you were prompted to think about considering putting that money into a different investment option,
which was Bitcoin, which I wasn't comfortable with. And listened to all these other opinions about it. A lot of them were fear. A lot of them um, was my lack of knowledge. I'm always learning more. But the bottom line is, at some point, I needed to look in the mirror and go, this individual knows more than I do, and I'm confident in their knowledge base. And at some point, you need to be able to have a little bit of faith to grow. So with real estate, I think about that with Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett and Ken McElroy and all these people. Sometimes you gotta have a little bit of faith and take guidance.
Well, and ask more questions
And
and
ask more questions,
do
get
more
more educated.
research. Exactly.
Um, but it's the first leap off that's super hard. I relate to that with my Bitcoin experience, because that was just such a moment for me where I'm like, okay, I will take a huge chunk of money. It took me a lot of effort, and make a commitment with something, and that made me learn more about it and dive more into it. And that worked out in our favor, which was a roll of the dice. Could have not. Same thing with real estate. It could not.
So let's wrap it up and remind us, what was the point of this little chat here?
The point of this is that if you're thinking about buying your first home, continue getting educated. Try to bring the fear level down. Know that overall, this country, things are continuously getting better, and that the way our system's built supports buying real estate, which should be the main focus. Like, you're not going against the grain of the system, you're going with the system. And if you are in that early age with kids, just have bought a new home, or think about buying one, or not bought one for 4 years, there's a lot of changes happening in your life. So if you need to expand in some way, or you need to, you're buying smaller than you wanted to, you're like, we don't always want to live in this 3-in-1 or 2-in-1. Well, no, have a little comfort. Things will probably be better for you in 2 to 5 years. They're going to get better.
And just think back, like, where were you 5 years ago, and what would you have now if you had made that decision 5 years ago? If we had bought that home 5 years ago, what would our life look like right now? Maybe we would have had to replace some unexpected things. Okay, that's the cost of owning a home, yes. And it's a risk we were willing to take, because now we've doubled our money moving power. So we put in 12,000, now we have 75,000. Like, I wouldn't have had that if I kept renting my home, that I did for the past 5 years. So keep that in mind and know the power of your potential with your choices.
Yep. Try to keep the fear low. Surround yourself with people who know. Choose where you're getting your information from wisely. And good luck with everything.